You're watching The Legal Breakdown. Glenn, I think the moment has arrived that a lot of us anticipated would happen. I'm looking at a headline right here. Trump plans to fire Jack Smith's team, use the DOJ to probe the 2020 election. So first off, on the Jack Smith front, there is reporting that Trump does plan to fire Jack Smith and the prosecutors who were on his team. And these are just career civil servants within the DOJ who were doing their job as they were assigned to this prosecution. Does Trump have the ability to do this?
No. And this has been tried by presidents past. So first of all, we have to break it out into two separate categories. Jack Smith, who's special counsel and has special protections against being fired, and then all of Jack Smith's team. And Brian, by extension, we could probably include all 2 million or 2.1 million federal government employees, civil servants who have lots and lots of protections as civil servants. But let's start with Jack Smith. So I think Donald Trump said, I will fire Jack Smith in, quote, 2 seconds after being sworn in. Here's the problem. We've seen this movie before, right? Richard Nixon, back during Watergate, what did he try to do? He tried to fire the special prosecutor, Archibald Cox, but he didn't have the authority to. So what he had to do was go to his attorney general and say, I want you to fire, to discharge special prosecutor Archibald Cox. Why? Because Archibald Cox had subpoenaed those, those deeply damaging audio tapes of Richard Nixon talking about his crimes, and Nixon didn't want to be held accountable for his crimes. Well, instead of firing Archibald Cox, the Attorney General, Elliot Richardson, resigned. He refused to do it. So then Donald Trump said, okay, number 2, Deputy Attorney General, a guy named William Ruckelshaus, I want you to fire the special prosecutor. And he said no, and he resigned. And then Richard Nixon found somebody who would do his dirty bidding, a guy people may remember, Robert Bork, who was the Solicitor General at the time, and he fired the special prosecutor in accordance with Richard Nixon's demands. And a court would later rule it was unlawful for him to fire the special prosecutor. Anyway, a president can't fire a special prosecutor, an independent prosecutor, Jack Smith. An attorney general for cause can. So first of all, Donald Trump doesn't have the lawful, let me say that again, the lawful ability to do much of what he has threatened to do. So now let's move from Jack Smith to all of the civil servants. Jack Smith's team of prosecutors. Back in, I think, 1883, our country went from a, to the victor go the spoils model of a federal government whereby whoever was in charge, whoever won the last election, got to basically collect up everything and enrich himself, to some protections for civil servants, because that was an acknowledgement that the government should be there to serve the citizens. The government shouldn't be there to serve the dear leader. And once these civil service protections began to come on board and we had legislation, the protections of civil servants, federal government employees, has only increased over time. So for 140 years, we have been protecting civil servants. So they can't be, after you do a 1-year probationary period as a federal government employee, you can't be fired except for good cause. So Donald Trump may think he is king of his kingdom and he can come in and banish any civil servants, federal government employees from his kingdom at his will without good cause, but he can't. We have a couple of remedies against those unlawful terminations. One is what's called the Merit Systems Protection Board, the MSPB, which gives due process rights to any federal government employee who, there's an attempt to wrongfully terminate them. They have in-person hearings. They're entitled to findings and rulings. They're entitled to appeal it. And guess what? After that, they can go into federal court and file lawsuits. Let Donald Trump try to engage in this wholesale hollowing out of federal government employees, civil servants who have these protections, and we might as well call the Trump years the attorney full employment years, because that is where all of these wrongful terminations will be handled in the courts, and it will all be handled at taxpayers' expense, which is another reason that Donald Trump should not go about trying to wrongfully terminate and hollow out the federal government, the civil servants.
Yeah, but Glenn, won't we be in a situation where Donald Trump will pretend that he has some predicate to fire Jack Smith by claiming that this was all politically motivated against him?
Yeah. And you can pretend all you want, but you know what? The law is not so easily duped when it comes to proving good cause. In other words, that Jack Smith was acting unlawfully. And, here is what is not a winning argument in court, because these issues may all end up before federal judges in the courts of Washington, D.C., who I believe will stand as a bulwark against Donald Trump's coming lawlessness. It's not really a good legal or evidentiary argument to say, well, Donald Trump says it's a witch hunt. Therefore, I have good cause to terminate him or order my attorney general to terminate him. Doesn't work that way in court. And Brian, this highlights the point that Donald Trump is forever fighting these battles in the court of public opinion, where he lies to those people who are gullible enough to listen and fall for what he says, just like in his criminal cases. He can lie all he wants, but once the first case that moved into court and was prosecuted actually was tried to a jury of his peers in New York, after a several-week-long trial, that New York jury convicted him in a New York minute. Boom, 34 felony convictions. Now, we can talk about how it is playing out presently, but it proves the point. Donald Trump can't go into a court of law or send his minions into a court of law arguing things like witch hunt and have federal judges fall for it. It's not going to work.
Glenn, is there a situation where, Jack Smith, if he decided to stay, he would obviously butt heads with whoever Donald Trump gets in as Attorney General. If it's Pam Bondi, so be it. There will be a hostile relationship between the two. Is there any concern that Jack Smith will actually self-select out by virtue of not wanting to be in a DOJ that'll be just filled with hostility against him?
Oh, absolutely. And that's why I saw Donald Trump's announcement of Matt Gaetz, of all people, as in the running for Attorney General of the United States. I saw that as Donald Trump's attempt to demoralize the good people at the Department of Justice and, try to encourage them to self-select. Just go ahead and get your resume together and get out now, because no self-respecting federal prosecutor or policymaker at DOJ or support staff member would want to work for a Matt Gaetz. So all of that may have been a calculation, if not a ploy, by Donald Trump, now that Matt Gaetz has withdrawn his name and Donald Trump has named Pam Bondi as the second up in the AG batting order. So, that may be part of his goal. And listen, the reporting is, Brian, that Jack Smith is, quote, winding down the cases. We don't know what that means, but we will know soon enough, because Jack Smith will be filing in federal court with Judge Chutkan, who is presiding over Donald Trump's election subversion case in D.C., what his position is. And it may very well be that I'm winding them down, and I'm going to ask you, Judge Chutkan, to simply put a stay in place, a hold, a pause until Donald Trump leaves office and he can again be prosecuted for his crimes. I don't know if that's the position Jack Smith is going to take, but it does feel like, if we can draw some reasonable inferences, that maybe Jack Smith is winding down and is going to leave government himself, because he knows the writing is on the wall and he will not be able to effectively operate as part of the Department of Justice under the reign of Donald Trump and whoever his attorney general ends up being.
Glenn, the second part of Trump's plan, according to reporting, is that he'll use the DOJ to probe the 2020 election. Is there any concern that, the lackeys that he puts in will, of course, validate his bogus claims of election fraud, and then he'll use those bogus claims of fraud in the 2020 election to then justify political prosecutions against people who rightfully sought to hold him accountable for what happened in 2020. So he'll say, okay, well, now there's adequate justification to go after, the Jack Smiths of the world, the Fani Willises of the world, all of these prosecutors who fought against me in 2020, and those were justified, by the way, but he'll pretend that they're not. And so he'll give himself a justification to basically turn the tables and go after people who rightfully went after him.
Yeah, not only a possibility, but entirely likely, given Donald Trump's track record. What did he do during his first administration? He had his corrupt Attorney General, Bill Barr, appoint a special counsel, John Durham, to do what? Investigate the investigators who investigated Donald Trump's coordination with Russia to accept interference in the previous election, and that investigation revealed and documented as many as 10 felony obstruction of justice crimes by Donald Trump. Donald Trump didn't like any of that, So when he came into office, or when he had the opportunity, he had Bill Barr appoint a special counsel to investigate the people who investigated and might have been intending to prosecute him. But what did we see the result of that nefarious undertaking be?
Nothing.
Well, we saw John Durham find almost nothing. He negotiated one guilty plea of some, I believe, FBI lawyer who had made some false entries in an affidavit, in an application for a FISA warrant. And then he charged 2 other people, claiming that they had committed crimes. And in each case, John Durham's prosecution went down in flames. And juries not only found them not guilty, the people Durham was prosecuting, but I think some of the jurors went on record as saying, you know what, our time as jurors were not well spent deciding this weak case. I'm paraphrasing there.
Yeah.
So, will Donald Trump do it again? Of course he will. Will the courts and will juries hold strong and not allow vindictive and baseless, vengeful prosecutions from being successful in court? I certainly hope so. I believe they will. And let me just add this, Brian, because people could listen to us and say, you know, you're always talking about how the rule of law is supposed to apply. It never seems to apply that way in a Trump administration, and I grant you that. But I don't think we can ever stop talking about how the rule of law is supposed to apply, so that when we come into the light and into the lawfulness, again, we will continue to understand how the rule of law is supposed to hold accountable high government officials who violate our nation's laws.
Glenn, I gotta channel the cynics here, of which I sadly include myself. But if this does go into the courts, and the final arbiter of whether Jack Smith's dismissal was valid or not, the final arbiter of whether the 2020 election, is gonna, if those results are gonna fall in Trump's favor or not, if that's gonna be the U.S. Supreme Court, doesn't that give you some worry that really at the end of the day that there is no bulwark if this gets all the way up to the Supreme Court?
Yes, some worry would probably be a gross understatement. It keeps me up at night knowing that we have rot at the top, right? We have a compromised and unduly ideological, partisan Supreme Court. But, what I would point to, Brian, because we're acknowledging the darkness, and frankly, things are going to get darker before they get lighter, but we also have to hold fast and feed the points of light. So, for example, this same Supreme Court, during Donald Trump's attack on the 2020 election results, rejected any case that sought to have the election's results reviewed. They would not buy into it. This is the same Supreme Court that just a matter of weeks ago told Mark Meadows, no, what you did together with Donald Trump, for which you're being prosecuted in a RICO case down in Georgia, none of it was an official governmental act. So the Supreme Court can get things right from time to time, but then again, I guess even a blind mouse bumps into a piece of cheese inadvertently. Yeah. But no, I haven't given up all hope that when it comes to the administration of the criminal laws of our country, as it pertains to what Donald Trump might try to do moving forward, hopefully, those people that Donald Trump may choose to vindictively prosecute, the Supreme Court will not give a corrupt president cover to railroad people. That may be a bridge too far for the Supreme Court, but then again, maybe it won't be.
Well, we will find out. And for those watching right now, if you want to follow along as this saga continues to play itself out, which I'm sure will last deep into the Trump administration, please make sure to subscribe. That's the best way to support our work and to stay on top of what's happening on legal news. The links to both of our channels are right here on this screen. I'm Brian Tyler Cohen.
And I'm Glenn Kirshner.
You're watching The Legal Breakdown.